Keep our program on time and on schedule. We got a lot to cover this evening, so we're going to go ahead and begin. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. Number one, we are thrilled that everybody is here. What a great turnout. How about a round of applause for everybody? Number two, since it is a full house, we're just going to ask for good theater etiquette. Just if you can, silence your cell phones so that they don't go off during the presentation. We are live streaming this live tonight on Facebook. Jason, what's the URL? What Facebook page are we on? On the Diocese of Orange Facebook page. This is being live streamed. So if anybody wants to send a text to anyone that couldn't be here tonight, some friends that are home for whatever reason they weren't able to get a ticket, arrive, we're going to be live streaming it. Anders, thank you for handling the duties tonight. Really appreciate it. If for whatever reason somebody needs facilities during the program, it's just go out in the lobby, right, and the facilities are right there. And with that, why don't we just go ahead and begin how we should begin all good things here at Christ Cathedral with a word of prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good and gracious God, we thank you for the gift of this evening. The opportunity to gather. You said where two or more were gathered in your name, you would be present, so we acknowledge you here. And we honor you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, by praying the prayer that Jesus taught us. And together we say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Again, my name is Mark McElrath. I'll be your MC tonight. I'm the Executive Director of Santiago Retreat Center. Show of hands, how many people have ever been with us out at the Retreat Center? Thank you very much. For the rest of you that didn't raise your hands, just to kind of give you some orientation of tonight's program and the Shroud Center and its relationship here. We're sitting at the Freed Theater in the Christ Cathedral Cultural Center, really in the center of the Christ Cathedral campus. If you went right outside the front driveway here, you'd be on Chapman Avenue. If you went 17 miles, just 20 minutes, right up into the foothills of the Santa Ana Mountains, you'd be in a wilderness setting. That's right where the Cleveland National Forest begins. And as God had planned it, there are 500 acres of reserved space that are Santiago Retreat Center. And our primary mission is to help with the renewal of parish life through retreats. So we welcome confirmation groups, we welcome spirituality groups. During the summer, we do summer camps. We literally have tens of thousands of people that come out to the retreat center on retreat. Probably 3.5, 4 years ago, through again a series of strange occurrences, the Shroud Center of Southern California, which has been in Orange County for over 20 years, was relocated from its place in Fountain Valley. How many people ever visited in Fountain Valley? Congratulations. I didn't know that many people knew where Fountain Valley was. You are to be congratulated. So a few years ago, the Shroud Center moved to the Retreat Center, and slowly but surely we started to understand God had a plan, which is he wanted tens of thousands of people, many of them young people under the age of 18, to be exposed to this amazing center that's been here in Orange County for over 20 years. So tonight we're going to be looking at the Shroud Center and examining, and we've asked our panel of experts to come and be with us. So for this evening's program, we're going to have a little bit of a presentation, a keynote talk by Barrie Schwortz, who's the photographer who took the first real images, and we'll talk more about that, the photograph of the official scientific study of the Shroud Center in 1978. Then we also have with us Father Robert Spitzer. Father Spitzer is the president of the Magis Center of Reason and Faith, which is also headquartered here at Christ Cathedral. In the very top of the Tower of Hope, Father Spitzer has the Magis Center of Reason and Faith, which also has the Credible Catholic Resources, the Credible Catholic website, or the Magis Center website has the Credible Catholic Resources, which help people understand more in depth. It's been an incredible resource for helping to bring people to understand that faith and reason are not mutually exclusive, but are actually complementary. And there's a section on the Credible Catholic website on the Shroud of Turin And it's one of the most powerful tools that they have on the site. So Father's going to be on our panel tonight. We also have the founder of the Shroud Center, Dr. August Aceta, who will be with us on the panel. We'll be talking a little bit more about Father and Dr. Aceta and introducing Barrie in a moment. Just to kind of give us an understanding of how this evening's going to roll, we're going to have our keynote discussion, go for about an hour. Afterwards, we're going to change the set real quickly, and we're going to go into the panel discussion. And then after that, we're going to close with a few comments, and then there's going to be an opportunity for reception afterwards in the lobby again for a little meet and greet and say hello, and maybe a last little bit of a cookie or coffee or something like that. But before we go too much further, I want to just take an opportunity to thank a few people. Number one, I want to thank Hank Evers. Hank is the Director of Marketing and Communications for the Diocese of Orange and for Christ Cathedral. Hank has been a tremendous partner for the Shroud Center since this whole adventure began, and has really worked very hard to make this evening example of what it is that we're trying to do at Christ Cathedral. Be a crossroads for cultural encounter. And what a great example tonight. Everyone came out to hear this evening's program in the Shroud Center. This is a perfect example of things that will be coming as Christ Cathedral journeys towards its dedication on July 17th with the blessing of the cathedral. It is already one of the most visited centers in all of Orange County. I understand the place down the street on Harbor draws a few more people. But thanks for the mouse, because the mouse brings the people here, and so it's great. This is, as I understand, the number 4 most visited tourist destination in Orange County after Disney, after Knott's, after the beach, and then Christ Cathedral. So again, the number of people, 20 million people come to Disney every year. The number of people that will be exposed to what's happening here at the Christ Cathedral campus, tremendous. Hank Evers is responsible for helping to tell that story. And by the way, upstairs tonight, there's also another exhibit going on in the Sistine Chapel. This is going to be here until January, so if you have an opportunity, please make sure that you also come back and see the Sistine Chapel exhibit on the 3rd floor. It's museum quality. It is absolutely beautiful. So Hank Evers, thank you. I also want to acknowledge Lee Sweeney. Lee is the Executive Director of the Shroud Center of Southern California. He's also our lead docent. And if any of you walk away tonight with any inspiration that you want to bring a group out to the Shroud Center, please come to the Santiago Retreat Center website, or the Shroud Center website, and book a group tour. Lee gives an absolutely fantastic presentation, and I strongly encourage you to come out and visit us. I also want to take this moment to acknowledge Jason Pearson. Jason is the Marketing and Graphics Design Director for the recently released film Unplanned. Has anyone had a chance to That film is impacting people tremendously. Jason and I were talking before the program. As I understand it, over 96 people who currently work in the abortion industry have already contacted the website to find a way out of that industry. There's an entire I also want to honor what's going on right now as we speak. All across the country, and certainly all across Orange County, is the 40 Days for Life Vigil for Life. There's a candlelight vigil in front of the Planned Parenthoods right now across the country. There is something happening across this country. That film has really helped to catalyze what's happening for life. And I'm just so proud that Jason is affiliated with what we're doing here at the Shroud Center, because it's really about evangelization and sharing the good news that God loves us so much. You might also recognize some of Jason's other work. He was involved as the artistic director for the promotion and marketing for a little film called The Passion of the Christ. So again, we can see the hand of God working through this journey of this man who's been brought into our team to help tell the story. And tonight, as we close our program, we'll see some of this beautiful work that's being displayed on our Shroud Center website. You'll see the digital media, the graphics, the storytelling is absolutely excellent, and something we can all be very proud of to help tell this story. Again, I just want to tell you, we are so excited to have everyone here this evening. We're going to take a moment now just to do a little bit more formal introduction for our panel tonight, and then we'll introduce our keynote speaker. On our panel this evening is Barrie Schwortz. Barrie is the Jewish photographer who took the photographs of the first scientific study of the Shroud of Turin in 1978. A team of 32 international scientists went to Turin for 5 days and conducted extensive scientific studies. Barrie was the official photographer, and he was there to photograph and document the work for the scientific team. Barrie is the creator of Shroud.com, the world's most complete website on the Shroud of Turin. I want to just encourage everybody to go to Shroud.com because the resources that are there have been compiled over this journey of decades. It's really the most complete place for you to see all of the scientific information to help people understand. And one of the great things about the scientific age that we're living in, the instrumentation improves month over month over month, some new discovery. Father, wasn't it just this week that we found a black hole was photographed for the first time? I mean, who would ever think that somehow scientific instrumentation would improve, that we could do these things? And with every one, the Shroud uses these instrumentations to study it and reveal the amazing things that God has hidden inside these images for us at this time. I want to also introduce our panel speaker. It's going to be Father Robert Spitzer. He is the past president of Gonzaga University. He currently is the president of the Magis Center of Faith and Reason, which is headquartered here, as I said, at Christ Cathedral in the Tower of Hope. He's the creator of Credible Catholic that can be found on the Magis Center website. And again, the Credible Catholic tab has a Shroud Center resource available that helps to really drill down on the scientific study of the Shroud from all its disciplines. Also on our panel this evening is Dr. August Aceta. Dr. Aceta is the founder of the Shroud Center of Southern California. He's been involved in groundbreaking research on the Shroud right here in Orange County. Through the efforts of Dr. Aceta, the Shroud Center of Southern California has put together a world-class advisory board of international experts on the Shroud. These are from people from all over the world. In fact, just a few months ago, we had one of them here on a similar evening. Ian Wilson from Australia was with us and came and shared on the history of the Shroud. Dr. Aceta has a medical degree, and while he was in medical school, the Shroud brought him back to the church and his Christian faith. He founded the Shroud Center in Southern California in 1995, and he has assembled one of the premier Shroud centers in the U.S. This is not an exaggeration because I know. I had the opportunity to visit it in Fountain Valley on a Holy Saturday with my nephew and godson who is being confirmed. Absolutely spoke to his heart as a 14-year-old. Today, as a 26-year-old man, he's absolutely committed Christian. I know that what we saw on that Holy Saturday had an impact in his life. These things change lives. And for my work at the retreat center, thousands of kids come out for their confirmation retreat. I don't know if you've ever worked a confirmation retreat, but on a Friday night, that's not exactly where they want to be. But during the retreat experience, when we pray, when we work as teams, when we break down, we work in small groups, when we have the encounters in the quiet moments of the wilderness, one of the beautiful resources when we go through the Shroud Center and see it. You can see the impact on the young people's lives. And I think we can all agree that today, nobody's challenged more than our young people trying to understand what they're called to believe. This resource that's there at that retreat center is impacting people's lives, not only the kids, but the chaperones that are there. You see people weeping because they're saying, is this real? Are you telling me this is real? It's an incredible presentation. So again, the Shroud Center is impacting lives right every day. Right, in fact, this weekend I have 3 groups at the retreat center. And one of them is a young adult group from the Friends of Israel. If you can imagine, these are people that do their entire weekend in Hebrew. They're up there this weekend, so we're going to be praying for them as they experience the retreat center. Anyway, Dr. Aceta, Father Spitzer, and Barrie are going to be our panel speaker, are going to be our panel this evening. We've got some questions that are going to be stimulating conversation and dialogue and greater understanding. All right, so let's take a quick process check. We're on schedule. We're moving our program along. I want to take this opportunity again to just encourage everyone to pay attention, participate, sit back. We're in the presence of really a grace-filled moment. Barrie Schwortz is the photographer who officially documented the scientific study of the Shroud of Turin in 1978. From that time, his life was impacted. He's become the foremost gathering of information on the Shroud at Shroud.com. It's based in St. Louis. He travels internationally. He is absolutely in love with this particular artifact, this relic, this evidence, this image, and he loves telling people about it and sharing with us. And tonight, again, through the amazing opportunity of the Shroud Center of Southern California, please join me in welcoming to the stage Barrie Schwortz.
Fire this up now. It's turned on, I think.
Yes, we can.
Should be on.
Help is on the way.
Okay. You know what?
Mark's mic.
Oh, it's working now. So, apparently, I am the Elton Judo of the Christ Cathedral. And it's a great pleasure to be here. Yesterday I was here. We got a great tour of the facility. Amazing, amazing. So I'm very honored to be here. And before I'm finished today, you'll know what a nice Jewish boy like me is doing, involved with the most important relic of Christianity. So I'll tell you that at the end. But in the meantime, the first thing I'm going to do is answer the question that I ask the most often. Matter of fact, I've already been asked 2 or 3 times since I've been here this evening. And that question is, how did you get involved with this? That was a good question. I asked myself that for a while. So, in 1976, I had a photographic studio in Santa Barbara, California. It was an illustrative, technical, professional studio, not portraits and weddings. And I'm a graduate of Brooks Institute. You may remember Brooks Institute. They used to be a school. 2 years ago, that's it. They're gone. After 70 years, they went away. So I've now outlived Brooks Institute. We were both born in 1946. I'm still here. Brooks is gone. And I was on the faculty there, as a matter of fact. And when I had my studio, and I was approached by a company in Santa Barbara that was Information Sciences. They were sort of an imaging type company, scientific company, a contractor to Los Alamos National Laboratories. I know you've heard of them. And for those who haven't heard of them, they're famous for inventing the first atomic bomb. So I worked on a project with them for 7 months as a photographic consultant. And of course it was about atomic bombs, so I can't really tell you much more. I'd love to tell you more, but if I do, then I have to kill you, and there's too many of you. In the end, we finished the 7-month project, and at the end of the 7 months, you know, when you're self-employed, when that phone rings, you're hoping, praying, it's the next job. So we finished the project, and about a week or 2 after we finished that project, the gentleman I worked with, a guy named Don Devan, called me again. And I thought, aha, another project. And he said, no, but what do you know about the Shroud of Turin? And I kind of laughed. I said, Don, I'm Jewish. And Don laughed and said, so am I, remember? He was one of the other Jewish guys who was on our team. And so he said, look, a couple of guys at Los Alamos, you can kill that one over there, maybe. A couple of guys at Los Alamos and Sandia Lab, a sister lab to Los Alamos, had taken a photograph of the Shroud meet in 1931, and they put it into a device called a VP8 image analyzer. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in a few moments here. But basically, you input an image with a black and white camera, and it displays it on a green screen monitor of some sort, like an oscilloscope type monitor. And it allows you to turn up and down the gain and rotate it, and tilt the image and all kind of stuff. Well, what it mainly does is it takes the lights and darks of an image and stretches them vertically into 3D space proportionate to each other. Now, back even at the beginning of the 20th century, in the early 1900s, there were some researchers who believed that there was some dimensional or spatial or depth or 3D information, if you will, encoded in the Shroud's image, but they had no way to visualize it. It was something that they theorized based on the way they looked at it. Back in the 60s, there was a photographer artist named Leo Valla. He believed the same thing. He was also a sculptor, so he took a photo of the Shroud, projected it onto a lump of clay, and sculpted a facial image of the shroud, which was quite accurate for based on what we know now. What was important about the VP8 image analyzer, it wasn't some miraculous thing. It just visualized for the first time using a scientific instrument that property of the shroud's image. And that was enough to get Dr. Jackson and Eric Jumper, Don Devan, and a couple of other guys, researchers that were there, to say, look, we need to go figure out how this image was made. Let's put a team together and see if we can get permission and go over to Turin and try and determine how the image was formed. So with that in mind, they decided they were going to put a team together. First thing they said, we need a photographer. Don said, wait, I just finished working on Barrie Schwortz, I'm going to give him a call. So Don says, so that's the history, he says, and of course he put it in technical terms. He said that there appears to be a correlation between image density and cloth-to-body distance. No quiz at the end, relax. And so, because technical guys, we know what that means. And so he said, okay, so you want to do this? And I said, no. And he said, well, let me bring you some literature. I said, okay, fair enough, before I make my decision. Well, there was a group in New York, in Esopus, New York, called the Holy Shroud Guild, 4 priests. By the time we came along, only 3 wanted passed. And they were promoting the Shroud of the United States. And so he brought me a pile of information about 1.5 feet high. They were all religious tracts. Didn't help me a bit. So then I'm thinking about it. That image property certainly made me curious. But I'm going to be honest, because there's some priests here, so I have to tell the truth. I was really thinking, free trip to Italy. That's what I was thinking. And so eventually I said yes, and I did join the team. And obviously I'm very grateful that I did. But I'll tell you this, in retrospect, looking back all these years now, God wasn't going to let me not be on that team, and I know that. But it took me a long time. Look, it took another 17 years after we finished before I even accepted the shroud was authentic. I was a total skeptic. I had no emotional attachment to Jesus. I was raised in an Orthodox Jewish home. My parents were born in Poland and immigrated. My grandparents lived with us. We followed all the rules. And so, but we also lived in a half Italian, half Jewish neighborhood. And so we were raised to respect the caller and the sisters and their habits the same way we would a rabbi. So there was never any issues between Christians and Jews, at least not in that neighborhood. You can't tell a Jewish mother from an Italian mother. One says eat, eat, the other says mancha, mancha. Same thing. So ultimately I joined the team. And as I say, I'm forever grateful that I did. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you a pretty quick overview of the shroud because my time is short. And I always tell everybody, getting me started is easy. Getting me stopped, not so much. So, and we do have a pretty tight time limit. My normal lecture is 1.5 to 2, and I've got 1 hour. So I'm not going to talk fast. I'm just going to have to keep it going. Anyway, with that in mind, what I'm going to do, show you a little bit about the shroud, just to introduce you, if you're not that familiar with what's there, although I think probably most of you are. And then I'm going to take you behind the scenes of what we did in 1978, and I'm going to bring it up to what we concluded at the end, remembering that our primary purpose was simply to answer one simple question: how was the image formed? And at the end, I'll tell you what we concluded. So with that in mind, if we can bring the lights down, see how good it is when technology works. I love it. So now I can stand off to the side. You've seen me enough. Now you can look at the screen, and let's see how well technology works. Okay. It worked. Ah, there it is. Okay, it worked. Okay, so we have this piece of cloth. It's 14.5 feet long by 3.5 feet wide. It's got all these markings all over it that makes it very difficult to kind of make sense of what's there. You've got all these burns, scorches. These triangular patches that are here are patches that are literally sewn in after it was damaged in a fire in 1532. In 1534, the Poor Clare sisters sewed these patches in. They sewed a backing sheet to the shroud to add stability to it. It had been pretty much weakened by the fire. And the problem with that is when you first look at the shroud, all you see are the burns, the scorches, the patches, and that kind of stuff. And what's really important aren't these dark markings, but what's between them? If you look, there's face, there's the arms, there's all kind of watermarks from the 1532 fire, so it's very confusing to the eye. So don't worry, I'm not going to force you to twist your necks. Give me a moment, you'll get a better view here in a sec. But the real issue is this. We have a cloth. There's the head, the arms, and the legs, the front of the body, or ventral view, the back of the head, shoulders, all the way down to the feet. So we have a head-to-head image. Let's see if this is going to work. There you go. How does that happen? Well, it happens when a cloth is placed around the body with the feet at one end, the head in the center, and the cloth folded up and over and back to the feet. Now, I have some Protestant friends who tell me the shroud must be a fake because it said there were linen strips in there. In the Gospels, when they opened the tomb, they found linen strips. Yeah, so obviously they say the shroud's got to be a fake because they must have wrapped Jesus like a mummy. Well, the problem with that is by the 1st century, even the Egyptians had stopped wrapping mummies that way. So that's not valid at all. But if you wrap a body this way and you want to move it, it's going to fall off. The cloth's just going to fall off the body. So they would bind the body into the cloth using linen strips, and that explains why they were in the Gospel, that they're mentioned in the Gospel. Now, the other thing my Protestant friends tell me is, well, the shroud's a fake because it said there were 2 cloths, and this was only 1 cloth, so it must be a fake. Not wondering how maybe over 2,000 years the 2 cloths might have gotten separated. Speaking of which, that second cloth, why was there a second cloth, which is mentioned in the Gospels, folded and separate from the other? Why was it there? Well, when I read that passage in the New Testament, I realized immediately this is an authentic Jewish burial because only Jews, even to this day, value blood so highly that if any blood-stained clothing or cloths that have been used to soak up the blood must be buried with the body. That's why it was in the tomb, and as soon as I saw that, I knew this was an authentic Jewish burial. So that's another thing that, and by the way, that second cloth would have been the cloth wrapped over his face and head to bring him from the cross to the tomb. And that still exists in the town of Oviedo, Spain. It's called the Sudarium of Oviedo. So that, again, is very consistent with the Gospels. Now, until 1898, nobody had ever heard of the Shroud of Turin outside of northern Italy. And then this gentleman, Secondo Pia, using this little camera here, and I'll show you a picture of me standing next to it in a few moments, and you'll see how little it is, with his big glass plates, had to climb up on a scaffolding, had to photograph the shroud for the first time, give him permission to do it, had to photograph it through glass with reflections, the voltage of the electricity and the electric lighting he used in the Royal Palace of 1898 fluctuated, so his exposures were off. He had to do it a second time. It wasn't so simple. But in the end, he made the first photographs of the shroud. Now, when Secondo Pia looked through his camera, this is what he saw. This is the natural color view of the shroud. And of course, that kind of a camera, you focus onto a ground glass at the back till it's in sharp focus. Then you take a big glass plate and put it in front of that ground glass and expose the film. But of course, there was no color film in 1898, so he had to use black and white film. So even though this is what his eye saw, this is what the film saw. And when he saw his glass plate, and understand how hard it is for me to speak to younger audiences, I had a 10-year-old kid ask me when I said film, he said, Mr. Schwortz, is that a film? Is that a USB device? They were still kind of old, I have to admit. And darkroom, another hard thing to explain to a 10-year-old. Anyway, this is what he saw. And he realized at that moment that what we see on the shroud is actually has its lights and darks reversed from what we're used to seeing. And when he made a photograph on a negative plate, it inverts those lights and darks. And now we have an image that looks far more natural than what we would see by looking directly at the cloth. Isn't that going to make it easier, right? You don't have to twist your neck anymore. So we're just going to go through some of the key features because there's not a lot of time. But starting right at the top of the head, you know, we've all seen throughout Christian art, they always depict Jesus with a laurel wreath. Well, that motif has been used, it was used in the 1st century when they were when an artist would paint or make a sculpture of somebody important, a Roman emperor, they always put a laurel wreath around their head. So that motif wasn't unique, and when Christian artists started depicting the Passion of Jesus, they just substituted the laurel wreath with thorns. But can you imagine telling that Roman soldier who's about to crucify this criminal that, before you do that, how about weaving him a pretty crown? Hey, let's make it look good. You think they did that? No, they took a nasty thorn bush, smashed it onto his head, and if you look at the top of the scalp of the man in shroud, his whole head is covered with wounds. So there wasn't just a pretty laurel wreath, but Christian artists have always depicted it that way. The other thing you might want to make note of, Christian artists always have artistic license, and they always paint Jesus with a modesty cloth. Yet the man of the shroud is naked. Remember, when we were doing this at the beginning, everybody said, oh, it's just a fake, it's a painting. Even I thought it probably was a fake. I was totally skeptical, frankly. And so there's one clue right there that this is not typical of any Christian artwork, because Jesus is nude. And that's never been done. Well, it has in more recent years, because people now know about the shroud. So that thing under the chin, by the way, is just a crease in the cloth, which, by the way, is easily seen over here. But look what happens when you convert everything to just black and white. Suddenly, the creases and wrinkles and things suddenly sort of take and become part of the image, which only adds to the confusion. And when people use those black and white images to do research, it's very easy for your eyes to be fooled. I get probably 20, 30 during the course of a year, people telling me what they found on the shroud. I found the face of Mary, I found an amulet. I always tell them, listen, do you not see the image of the man? Because I thought that was what this was about. Anyway, so I make that point to you that over here it looks like a crease, because it is. Over here, is that part of the image? Interestingly enough, there is an artwork going back, I'm not sure the exact date of it, I think maybe 12th century, 13th century, where that line was incorporated into somebody's artwork. Because they used to roll the shroud up on a dowel and put it in a reliquary box. And you know, ladies especially know this, if you roll something up a whole bunch of times and it's a crease, it's going to get pressed in there. Do that for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and those creases are pretty pressed in, pretty hard to remove. Continuing on, we have the blood stain here at the side. See the oval shape and blood flow from it. That's the spear wound. Now over here you can clearly see all these water stains. Talk about confusing. That's a water stain, not the back of the head up there. More creases, more water stains. And I'm going to point something out most people miss. Look at his chest. You see all those marks on his chest? Those are scourge wounds. Now look, artists throughout the centuries have depicted Jesus scourged from behind, and his back is all torn up, right? But if you're in reality, if you're standing behind somebody and whipping them, and you take just a baby step closer and you hit them, those thongs are going to come around, they're going to scar the front of the body as well. No artist would even think to do that. They always show the back scarred. And this is another piece of evidence in my mind that made me start to believe, well, it's probably not a painting, because artists wouldn't have thought of that even in medieval times. And so these are some of the things that are kind of key images. Now, on the wound, or on the wrist, you see a wound. Now, we only see an exit wound. We only see the back of the wrist. And a lot of people have said, well, this is a big deal because all the artists throughout history have depicted Jesus with a nail right through the center of the palm, right? We've all seen that. Let me tell you something. Take your thumb and your little finger right now, touch them together. Just your thumb and your little finger, and then look in your palm. Notice there's two fleshy parts with a groove running up the middle. That groove is called the thenar furrow, and guess what? It's a perfect place to drive the nail. And those Roman soldiers knew it. They grabbed the hand, put the nail there, nailed it through. It's only 1 inch down from the center of the palm. So it's still in the palm, nothing against what it says in the Gospels. But if you look at where it comes out, exactly where we see it on the shroud. So these are all little bits and pieces. Not any one of them powerful enough to get me to accept this was authentic. People always ask me, well, what convinced you? All of the above, 1,000 pieces of data and evidence. That's what convinced me. Continuing on, more patches, water stains, I've already shown you. And down at the feet, we have blood stains from crucifixion wounds. Again, from the ventral or front view, it's a little hard to tell how many nails. So we're going to look at the other side now. And now you can see blood stains covering the scalp. See? And more creases, of course. And now you can clearly see the scourge wounds. And look, they start at his shoulders and go all the way down to his ankles. They literally beat him from head to toe. And I know it's hard to see. It's what happened. That's what's there. And by the way, this has all been documented as forensically accurate, not just by one or two, but by a number of doctors, medical doctors and forensic pathologists. On our team was Dr. Robert Buckland. Remember the Quincy TV show? It was based in part on him. And he was on our team, and he was a consultant to the producers. So we have real experts on our team, not a bunch of religious freaks, as some of the skeptics would have you believe. I'm certainly not a religious fanatic, even today. And there were 3 Jewish guys on the team. Dr. Alan Adler was our blood chemist, the 3rd Jewish guy. So to call us a bunch of religious fanatics that we're all, crazy for Christ, as one skeptic once said, not even close to the truth. That's part of what prompted me to form Shroud.com. Anyway, continuing on. Remember, we're now believing that some medieval forger did this. So let's look at something that I consider to be pretty strong evidence against that. Remember that spear wound in the side? Well, if you lay a body down and there's still blood oozing out of it, it's going to pool at the small of the back. It certainly does. There it is. You can see it. That means this medieval forger not only had to invent the concept of a photographic negative, but he had to discover gravity, because that's what caused that. It's another piece of evidence, again, a small piece by itself, meaningless, but added to the pile of evidence, pretty powerful. Now, we also have these L-shaped burn holes. Now, because I'm not going to be able to go into the whole carbon dating like I would like to, I'm not going to be able to show you why those are significant, but I'll tell you later why they are. I won't be able to show you, but I'll be able to tell you. And if you look all the way down, you can see the scourge wounds all the way down to his feet. And when we get to his feet, now we have an entire bloody footprint. What does that footprint tell us? If you lay on your back, and I'm not suggesting anybody do that right now, but if you lay on your back and you want to put your foot flat, you have to bend your knee. Okay? And so we know that one knee of the man with the shroud was bent. Many believed that he was in rigor mortis, and that was the position that his legs may have been while he was on the cross. Okay? And the other one, we're only seeing the back of the ankle, so we're seeing the heel effectively, and the toes would be pointing away from you. Now, there's been a great debate, not that I think that it's horribly critical, about whether or not they use 3 nails or 4 nails. Of course, for Catholics, the 3 nails sort of ties with the Trinity, and I know that sounds great, but we have 1 crucifixion victim's remains that were found in 1968, Jehohanan. And apparently when they nailed him to the cross, the nail must have hit a knot in the wooden bent, so they couldn't pull it out because the Romans saved the nails. They were a precious commodity back in the 1st century. So they buried Jehohanan with the nail still in his ankle. And it was through the side of his ankle, implying that there were 4 nails, 1 for each leg, into the stipes, which is the vertical part of the cross, 1 on either side. And of course, we can't be certain about that. We know 1 for each hand. So whether it was 3 or 4, I always tell people that are making a big issue of that, does it matter? Look what they did to him. That's what matters. Okay, here's another view of the scourge wounds a little closer. And I'm going to try and move through these pretty quickly. This is what a calabrum looks like. This would have been the device. Now, for a long time, the skeptics said, well, there was no such thing, or there was, but it did look like that. Well, it turns out that when they excavated Herculaneum, they found some of these lead weights that were shaped like that, and Dr. Buckland got a hold of one, laid it on a life-size image of the shroud, and it was the same shape and size. So that's a pretty good piece of evidence, too. Again, not definitive, but 1 more piece of evidence. Now, I did mention the VP8 image analyzer, so this is what it looks like. Now, I always tell everybody, it looks like an old stereo tuner. Try telling that to a 10-year-old. Good luck. And that's what it does look like. And see, I'm looking at this audience, and I'm pretty sure most of you know what I mean. Well, most of you, anyway. There are a few younger folks out here. Anyway, so that's the device. You'll see below it the monitor. And this is, by the way, these videos are taken right off the screen of an actual VP8. This isn't something I created in Photoshop or something. This is what the guys saw in 1976 that prompted them to create the STURP team and do what we did. So you can see you can turn up and down the gain, you can rotate the image. Now, here's the thing. That 8 in the VP8's name stands for 8 bits. What that means is between black and white were only 8 layers, or 8 levels. So there's black, dark gray, lighter gray, all the way to white, but only 8. So the image is rather coarse. It's not a refined image, it's not real smooth. Makes it a little difficult. But you can see the natural relief of the form. You can see the 2 swollen cheekbones, one more swollen than the other. You can see the nose protruding, the mustache, the mouth. You can see the hands. You can even see fingers. This is the natural relief of a human form. And although some people say, well, that doesn't mean anything, try it with any other photograph and you'll see you're not going to get the same result. Now, in modern days, some of the skeptics have created an image that will do this, but they already have knowledge of the shroud, knowledge of what the experts have said, so that's not fair. You can, of course, now, they say somebody in medieval times did that. That's ridiculous, in my opinion. So, I told my friend Kevin Moran, who just passed away about a month ago. I was at his house in 1997 when I made these video clips. And I told Kevin, listen, I'm going to tell people that normal photographs don't do this, so I need to have a normal photo to put in the VP8 in addition to the images I made. So I took a picture of his grandkids off the wall, put it in the VP8, and now let's look at it. Let's use the bottom one that makes it easier. Notice his hair is now going down into his head. Notice that his nose and his cheeks are at the same level, flat. His eyes are sort of distorted, and his mouth is twisted, kind of like a monster in a movie. And the kid on the right, his face is just flat. So you don't get the natural relief of the human form with a normal photo. The VP8 is going to stretch them into vertical space proportionate to each other no matter what you put in there. But the shroud image gave us this natural relief. Now, if it's truly there, then there should be other methods that we can use to extract that information and see if we can verify that the VP8 is correct. This is a technique called photo relief by Aldo Bareschi, an Italian photographer who's a very clever guy, and he used the darkroom technique. That's where I would get into trouble with 10-year-olds again. Darkroom technique, and because photographic film was not limited to an 8-bit grayscale, but a much broader range of gray, all of a sudden you have, look, much more refined features, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the cheekbones, down to the fingers, very clearly visible, although you can see the knees to the feet, back of the head, shoulders, all the way down, calves to the feet again. So obviously that information's there, and obviously we live in a digital era. The gentleman in Malta back in 1997 asked me to send him a photo. He was using a digital program called Bryce. Bryce was a program used by animators to create topographical backgrounds in their animations, and he sent me this. Now this is 1997, so obviously computers have come quite a ways in 97, but you can see that 3 different techniques that I've shown you that all indicate that this data is really there. This isn't something we made up. So, back to our team. We worked in different groups around the country, regional groups. I was in the California group, there was a Colorado group, there was a New Mexico group, and there was a group back east, the New England Institute, where some of our medical guys came from, John Heller and Alan Adler, and Joe Gambicia, who passed away a long time ago. And so we spent 17 months planning before we went to Italy. In those 17 months, we designed and fabricated a special table because every test that we did had to be non-destructive. It could cause no harm to the shroud. So we designed a steel table. Now, when I say steel, people say, well, why wasn't it stainless steel? Because these scientists understood that stainless steel was treated with chemicals that might have been harmful. They didn't want to risk it. So it's plain steel. So here we are at what we call the dry run. It was the first time, a month before we went to Turin, where the whole team came together. We met each other for the first time, many of us, because the different groups have been spread out. And we tested our equipment and the instruments we were going to use, and this steel table, which, as you can see right down here, can be rotated up into a vertical position besides the horizontal positions here. That's just a replica shroud. Now, one thing I didn't tell you is, when we were doing all this during that 17 months, I started getting antsy and decided I was going to quit. Well, that's what I thought. But this gentleman here, Don Lynn, may rest in peace. I'm going to say that a lot tonight, because 42 years have passed. Don Lynn was the head of imaging on the Voyager, Viking, Mariner, and Galileo projects at JPL here in Pasadena. Don Lynn was also a good Catholic man, and I remember saying to him one day, "Gee, Don, what's a nice Jewish boy like me doing here?" And he said, "Well, apparently you've forgotten that the man in question was a Jew." And I said, no, I knew that. I didn't know a lot, but I definitely knew that Jesus was a Jew. I mean, we're not stupid. We knew that. So Don Lynn looked at me and he said, "Listen, stop complaining, shut up." He says, "Go to Turin, do the best job you can do. God doesn't tell us in advance what the plan is, but one day you will know." That's what kept me on the team. So I owe it to that man there. Now, if I can make this work. So, we package all of our stuff into 80 crates, wooden crates, package it up, ship it over to Turin. We book our hotels, we book our flights. There were 24 of us that went over to Turin to collect the data, and another 8 that remained here to keep the cost down, because they weren't needed to collect the data. They were eventually going to evaluate the data, so they didn't need to be there when we collected it. So we package up all these 80 crates, we ship them over there, and now I'm going to make a strange statement. There was no Pope when we examined the shroud. Because on September 29th, the day before we were supposed to leave, John Paul I died unexpectedly. So remember, no emails, not even fax machines in those days. So at midnight, the night before we're to fly out to New York and get on a plane to Turin, we're all on the phone going, "What are we going to do? The Pope just died. Will this impact our ability to examine the shroud?" We didn't know. But by then, the die was cast, so we went. But it's ironic, there was no Pope. The Pope, Pope John Paul II, was elected on October 16th. Our examination was from the 8th to the 13th. There was no Pope when we examined the shroud. We were in Turin when the white smoke went up and John Paul II became the Pope. So this is Turin, and in Turin we have the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. Directly behind that, we have the Guarini Chapel, which had been built specifically to house the shroud, had a beautiful black marble altar, and within the grating behind that altar was where the reliquary box with the shroud was permanently stored for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then this square building over here, behind it, is the Royal Palace of Turin. These 3 buildings were connected. You could go behind the main altar into the Guarini Chapel, through the Guarini Chapel, out the back door of the Guarini Chapel, directly into the Royal Palace. The shroud, during this period, this was to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the shroud in Turin, so they put it on public display for the first time since 1931. And lots of people came to see it. And at the end of that public display, we were going to get the shroud to do our work. Unfortunately, as we arrived in Turin, the first piece of news we got was Italian customs have seized all the equipment and are not going to release it. So that was our greeting. "Welcome to Italy. Your equipment's in customs and not going to let it." Continuing on, now, while the public display is going on, you look at this, you see there's quite a few people there. See, quite a few people there, but look over here. See that area at the far left there? Here's a closer view. How would you like to stand in a queue for 10 hours to get about 3 minutes in front of the shroud? That's what people had to do. It took as long as 10 hours, maybe even longer. I have good news for you. 2025 is the next public exhibition of the shroud. Ostensibly, we're not absolutely certain, but that's what John Paul II said, so there's a pretty good likelihood that that'll be the case, and that's also the next holy year of the Catholic Church. How many Jews know that, do you think? Hey, I've been hanging around with you guys for a long time. Anyway, you can see that that's what people were willing to do, and I was really amazed. Sort of a pilgrimage, obviously. I didn't know much about pilgrimages when I was 32 years old. Anyway, inside the Turin Cathedral is where the shroud is displayed. Through the glass wall behind it, you can see the Barrie Chapel back there. People would come down, file down, get a few minutes in front, and then be ushered out for the next group. Now they have it staggered, kind of like, steps, so that more people can be in front of it, and you're about 3 meters, 10 feet away, so you get a pretty close view, but of course it's also displayed through bulletproof glass, which really wreaks havoc with your little phone cameras that use an infrared device to focus, because the glass is so thick it focuses on the surface of the glass rather than on the shroud behind it. So if any of you were there in 2010 or 2015 and you took some photos and found that they weren't quite as sharp as you'd hoped, that's why. Okay, there's the Barrie Chapel, and you can see this beautiful grading back here is where the shroud was kept. Also, notice the dome up there. Well, in the early 90s, big chunks started falling out of the dome. And so they said, somebody's going to get killed, we got to. So they took the shroud out of the Barrie Chapel in its reliquary box, put it behind walls of bulletproof glass, again, out in front of the main part of the cathedral, right in front of the main altar. And so the shroud is there on display. They get it all repaired. It costs like $25 million or euros or whatever. 25 million something or others, a lot of money. And then just as they completed it in April 97, an arsonist got in, set a fire, completely destroyed the Barrie Chapel, completely did severe damage both to the cathedral and to the royal palace. But the shroud was rescued from the burning debris by a man named Mario Trematore, who is actually an expert Baroque art, but a volunteer fireman who lives about a block from the cathedral. So Mario runs to the cathedral, puts on his fireman's hat and coat, and grabs a 9-pound hammer. And he runs in, and nobody told Mario that a 9-pound hammer can't break bulletproof glass, so he went and broke the bulletproof glass and rescued the shroud. And if somebody had told him it was impossible, would that have made a difference, I wonder? Probably not. Anyway, Mario is accused of being a hero, and this whole thing, by the way, his rescue is on video. If you go to shroud.com to the 1997 fire page, you can click on the link to see the YouTube video of Mario rescuing the shroud. And what's really amazing, Mario rescues the shroud, he brings it all out, and you watch it on video, and Mario, when he's accused of being a hero, says, "Hey, I'm no hero, but the guy who made the video is the real hero. He didn't have a fireman's hat or a coat or anything. He was the training officer for the fire department. And he's in there with all this falling, burning debris, and he makes a video, and you've got to see it to believe it." Now, years later, at a conference here in the U.S., Mario came, I think it was maybe in, might have been 1998. Mario came, was it 98? Yes, thanks. Mario comes and you know how the Italians have these little, kind of little jewel box thing, and he hands it to me and it's rattling. And so I open it up and I have a piece of the glass that he broke. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, continuing on. So there's the wooden box. And after this fire, you can see the wooden box, you can see a red soap, you can also see a big asbestos cloth, not really good for anybody. And I think after the fire, somebody recognized the fact that maybe a wooden box isn't the best thing to keep this around. So they took it out of that and they built a special cabinet for it, where it's now laid flat, no more rolling it up. It's in a nitrogen-argon atmosphere, kind of like the Declaration of Independence is. It's temperature and humidity controlled. It's behind bulletproof glass. It's light tight, so light, which can be harmful, long-term exposure could be harmful. That's now taken care of, and it's fireproof. How about that? So this is what it looks like now, and if you go to Turin before the next exhibition, just a few blocks from the cathedral is the Sindone Museo, the Shroud Museum. Go there, and you can see the reliquary box where it used to be stored. That's what it looks like. But if you go to the cathedral now, there's the great big reliquary now. You can't see the shroud, but then they can roll this out in front of the altar again, and out comes the shroud up, and they put a frame around it, and it's still protected, still behind thick glass. So that's what you would see today. Now, let's see what's next. Oh, I told you that's really me. I told you that I was going to show you a picture of Secundo P and his camera. Now, what's really ironic is I used to say, oh, look at that old technology and that brand new technology. Except today they're both equally obsolete because they both use film, right? So, they let us into the palace, but 5.5 days have gone by and they aren't letting our equipment loose. Well, we were there a week in advance to try and unpack everything and calibrate the instruments and be ready when the shroud was brought to us. Time's ticking. Well, being from Pittsburgh, PA, no palaces in Pittsburgh that I'm aware of, they let us in, so I'm thinking, well, while I'm here, let me take some photos for myself. Okay, just for me. So this is from the room in which we examined the shroud, looking down the hallway, which was basically a huge closet for our equipment. That's the fresco in what we call the equipment maintenance room. It actually been a bedroom for visiting royalty when the palace was still being a palace. And this is the fresco in the room in which we examined the shroud. When we looked up, that's what we saw. Now remember I said this was just for myself, but I also told you about the 1997 fire. Well, in 1998, they decided to put the shroud on display to assure everyone that it was safe and sound and hadn't been harmed. And I was given the great privilege of taking these photos, which I made just for myself, of these frescoes which have been severely damaged by smoke and water, and present them to the Archbishop of Turin to help restore them to their original beauty. That's how God does things. That's not my idea. Right? Yeah, that's worth it, for sure. So, in my young arrogance, I used to think I knew a lot. Boy, I've been humbled by all of these things. Well, let me back up just for a second. So now our equipment's tied up. On the 5th day, Father Peter Rinaldi of the Holy Shroud Guild, which I mentioned earlier, who was born in Turin, so he's Turinese. Well, that's how they would say it. He goes down and says, look, I'm going to get the equipment out because I know how to get things done in Turin. He went down there and he walks into the customs office. Who's the man in charge? Guy comes out, I'm in charge, Father, what can I do for you? What is your name, sir? Now the guy's suspicious. Father Peter's a pretty big guy. Why do you want my name? And Father Peter said, well, there's about to be an international incident, and I'd like to give you credit for it. And then he slipped him 100,000 lira. 80 bucks. And they loaded all our stuff on a dump truck, and there it is. Now I have to tell you this. I found out there's a little more to the story. The Archbishop of Turin also put up the mortgage on the cathedral as collateral. Okay? So it went way beyond Father Peter. Father Peter went in and got the guy to release it, but it was probably only after the Archbishop had already done his thing. So, but it's a great story, and Father Peter was very cool. So now we have it on this lorry, this dump truck, and I'm making this photo and thinking, any second, the guy's going to pull the lever and just dump our stuff out. So actually somebody ran up to the driver and said, please don't dump out our equipment. And the driver just looked at us and said, no, of course not. Unload the truck, please. So here we are having to unload our equipment. Now we're down to a day and a half before the shrouds can be brought to us. And now we have to unload that equipment and load it into the palace. I'm going to go through these pretty quick. Ooh, not that quick. Oh, by the way, that's really me. Poking my head around. Now look at our steel table. You notice that there are panels in it that are removable? We're going to do x-rays. You can't do x-rays through steel, so those panels have to be removable. Well, when we got it unpacked, the first thing we noticed, there was a white powdery corrosion on the surface of all the panels. But I also told you we had 2 JPL guys with us. And they anticipated this might be a problem in getting us across the ocean. We might get some corrosion. So they brought with them 2 rolls of gold foil mylar from NASA, the same stuff that they use in the space shuttle, in the cargo bay of the space shuttle in on the satellite. That's your tax dollars at work, folks. Yes, it was. And so we had to then cover all these panels with gold foil mylar, which we'll see in a moment. I always laugh at this photo because years ago when I first showed this, I go, oh, look at that new technology in front of that old 400-year-old tapestry. Except this was before solid-state electronics, okay? And so whatever that is now, I have no idea what those boxes are for, but I bet you got an app for that in your phone. Probably. And here's Vern Miller and Ernie Brooks unpacking some of the photo gear. Again, you can see that the palace hallway was sort of our closet. And there's the equipment maintenance room. And I'm going to point something out to you here real quick. Okay. See the garden hoses? Well, here's the problem. Back in those days, temperature was an issue with certain instruments, and they needed to be water cooled. Well, I'm standing in the doorway looking into the equipment maintenance room. Down the hall to my left, all the way at the end, is the only operating bathroom in the palace. And this is parquet wooden floors that moved when you walked on them. So we had to go out and buy a bunch of garden hoses, string them all together, run them through the equipment maintenance room, through this doorway back here, into the room where we examine the shroud. You can see them over here. Hey, you got to do what you got to do. Now, this is covering the windows. Why? Because we're doing infrared or thermal imaging, and the beautiful shutters were not that beautiful and let sunlight stream through and would have driven the instruments crazy. So we had to cover and foil all the windows. Now, there's Don DeVan, the atomic bomb buddy of mine. And that's not me, that's Sam Pellicore, an optical physicist, and Vern Miller. And what are they doing? Remember, the shroud is this big, long piece of cloth. Well, and the room was not very deep, so we couldn't back up enough to get the whole thing into our frame. So they're setting up a camera support rail. They're measuring the distance. They sandbagged it in place. So when I came from my time to photograph it, I was able to photograph half the shroud, slide it down to the other side of the rail, and photograph the second half. And because these guys thought to do this, 20 years later, when I had the original film digitized and put it into Photoshop to put the two halves together, it was a perfect match because they thought to do this. And remember, we had to think of this and build it all and plan it and ship it before we ever went to Turin ourselves. That's the thoroughness of our team. Now, anybody been to Italy? Oh, a bunch of you have. So you know that, I'm trying to be diplomatic, but things in Italy don't usually run on time. So imagine our shock when an hour and a half ahead of schedule somebody goes, "Here comes the shroud." So this is the part that really gets a laugh from the 10-year-old. So I had to put the lens on the camera, put the flash on the camera, turn on the flash of it to charge up, and then run out into the hallway. This is the back door of the Guarani Chapel. And they're bringing the shroud in. I made one photo at that moment. The only sharp part of the photo is that wolf right there. This is all out of focus if you're up close and personal. You can see that. And you know what? This will never, ever happen again. So obviously capturing a moment, even if it's not in focus, is less of an issue than not getting it at all. Continuing on. Now you see some of the gold foil. Oh, sorry. They're my photos. Well, they're not mine anymore. They belong here. Anyways, you can see the panels are being covered, and already they're unwrapping the shroud. And look, we still aren't even finished yet. And now we're unveiling the shroud in front of us. Now, for a long time I didn't show this photo because there's a hidden story. But I'm going to share the story with you quickly. The Italian scientists were not really happy with us being there. So they told us, okay, and matter of fact, they lobbied to stop us until the shroud was brought in the room. But they realized, sorry, you know, everybody says, well, how did you get the church to give you permission? The church didn't give us permission. The owner of the shroud, King Umberto II, gave us permission. Been in the Savoy family for over 500 years. And the church were the custodians at the time. So they had to go along with what the king said. Like Mel Brooks said, it's good to be the king. Anyway, so the Italian guy said, okay, well, fine, you can see you're going to examine the shroud, but you better not touch it, because the carabinieri, the state policemen in plain clothes with guns, if you touch the shroud, they're going to shoot you. So over here are the Italian guys, over here are the American guys, look where their hands are. How do you examine the shroud with your hands tied behind your back? This moment only lasted maybe 10 or 15 seconds before Professor Gio over here, you can see his hands just about to put it on. He starts handling it, and we're all waiting for the gunfire. No gunfire. Anyway, so we examined the shroud. We're looking, this is our first look at it. By the way, after about 15 minutes, you know, we photographers always have a high-powered magnifier in our pocket. I pulled it out and I started looking at the image. I was looking for paints or pigments or anything that would imply an artwork binder or something. Nothing. Just fibers. Yellow fibers that are slightly darker than the ones surrounding it. So it didn't take me long to kind of, in my heart, say, well, whatever it is, it doesn't look like it's a painting or an artwork of any kind. And ultimately, our science, I believe, proved that. Now, they were worried about us, right? So here's the shroud, ready the way it was on public display. See the white wooden board that it's been attached to? How do you think they attached it? Thumbtacks. Yeah. So now, wherever there's a thumbtack, there's a little hole, rusty hole with a rusty circle around it. And they're worried about us. Look what we went through. So, as you can see, now they're removing thumbtacks. And they did. They got them all removed, fortunately. See, I'm doing on time here pretty good. Okay. Now, finally we get all the panels covered, the table's rotated horizontally, and we move the shroud onto the table. There you go. Why are those things around? What are those white things? Those are the magnets we use. Why are they white? Because to be sure that not one particle of metal from those magnets might have been left on the shroud, the magnets were coated with Teflon. And again, they thought of this beforehand. That's how smart these guys were. So now, Max Fry is a Swiss criminalist. They decide he's going to go first. He's from Switzerland. He's a guy who pioneered the use of sticky tape to remove debris from the clothing of crime scene victims. Very good idea. There might be a little difference between the clothing of a crime scene victim and the Shroud of Turin. So Max obviously stopped at his local dime store on the way to the couch and bought the cheapest roll of dime store tape he could find. Not even Scotch tape, because we too had tape. We went to 3M. We had 3M coat a special coating on the tape so it would leave no gum on the surface of the shroud. Everywhere Max put his stuff, there was a little bit of gum left that attracted dust and dirt over the years. And then Max, and by the way, the 3M tape we had was also designed so that the base of the tape, the mylar base of the tape, had specific optical properties to allow us to do polarized light when it crossed to be straight from the tubes. Yeah, pretty smart stuff. Continuing on. Now look, we're watching Max, and they're worried about us. And look what Max is doing here. And then Max, yeah, we were pretty much standing there in shock. And then Max takes his tape and he walks over to the face, the most iconic part of the shroud, and he's just about to put it on the tape when John Jackson runs up to him, grabs him, and physically pulls him away from the cloth. And if it looks like John and Max are about to hit each other and the man in the middle is acting as a referee, that's exactly what's happening. That's Professor Luigi Ganello, who was the Archbishop's scientific advisor at the time. And it was decided after a rather heated 10-minute discussion, nobody put tape on the face, okay? Most iconic part of the image. Now, Professor Max finishes his, Professor Rigi gets up and does his stuff. Professor Rigi was given 2 weeks' notice. The Americans are coming. You got to think to do something, and you got to do it right away. He had no time, no budget, but he came up with a clever idea of using an endoscopic camera or a vacuum and separated the shroud in places between the cloth and that backing sheet that they put on it called the Holland cloth, and inserted between to kind of look at the backside of the shroud and gather some debris from between the two cloths. Very clever. And so here he is doing that, and they're separating the two, and I'm thinking, it's been 450 years at this moment in time before anybody's seen the backside of the shroud. So I realized at any moment now we're going to get that first look in 450. I ran around to the other side and made probably what is the best well-known image I made in 1978. And that's the precise moment where we got to see the backside of the Shroud of Turin in 450 years. And that's Ray Rogers and Professor Ricci and John Jackson. Okay. Oh, I don't know what the sister was thinking. Probably something like, Mamma Mia, the Americans have landed. But I felt so bad for her. I could sense that she was stressed. Her job was to care for the shroud. And so I felt very bad, and I always show this photo in her memory because I could sense her stress. And those are her hands, and this is one of the samples. I'm sorry, I went a little too quick there. That's one of the samples. And remember, this is before we even started. Reggie's doing his thing. They separate the back from the sheet below it. There's the vacuum they used. There were sterile filters in the handle, not the kind of vacuum we have around the house, folks. It's a laboratory vacuum. And then Reggie inserts his endoscopic camera. Now, you know anything about endoscopic cameras, you know that there's a thing at the one end, and then there's a fiber optic bundle that brings the image back to the camera. But in 1978, the fiber optic bundles were so coarse that it looked like a photo taken through the eye of a fly. You all seen that, you know? So none of his photos were really very usable. But think how clever he was. He knew his camera could see a circle diameter of 10 centimeters. He made a string grid, 10 diameter square of each, laid it over, because what do you know, how do you know what you're looking at? Remember, no digital cameras, no LCD displays to see what the camera sees. We were shooting on film. So he makes these photos, he turns on his focusing lamp. And folks, that's the first piece of scientific evidence I can show you that proves the shroud is not an artwork. I said the first, there are many, but this is the first one, and we learned it before we began our test. That's the blood stain on the forehead. Notice when it's soaked into the cloth with light passing through the cloth, transmitted light, you can see the added density. Now, wait a minute, if this is a painting, and it were painted, and we put transmitted light through the whole shroud, there were paint there, at least applied the way the blood, which soaked all the way through the cloth, and water stains as well. So they said, Barrie, we want you to photograph the entire shroud with transmitted light, which I did, and take a look at that, folks. Look what you get to see and what you don't see. First of all, you see the blood stains soaked through the cloth. You see the added, you can see the water stains, scorches, burns, patches, holes. What don't we see? The image. And here's a reference, just so you can see it. Go back. There you go. Oh, not too far. So you can see, this is the first piece of data that we had that indicated that there was no paint or pigment applied to the cloth to make the image on the shroud. Now I'm going to have to go real quick because I'm running out of time already. Like I said, get me started easy. So rather than say these words and put you completely to sleep, I'm going to show you the instruments, I'm going to show you the experiments those instruments are responsible for, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Now, today, this is the ultraviolet spectral equipment. Today, a small handheld device can do what all that stuff did, and notice the output of this was a chart recorder. Okay? No computers, or basically no computer. Now, there's the little devil that cost us 5 days in customs. That's a low-power x-ray. You know, when you go to the dentist, he puts that thing in your cheek, and it takes about 1 second, and he exposes it, right? Well, x-rays can be dangerous and harmful to the cloth, so this is a very low-power x-ray. Each exposure, 20 minutes. Now, remember those parquet wooden floors? So, if you move around, you're going to blur the x-ray, so we all had to leave the room when they were doing the x-rays. Not only that, with a long exposure like that, they allowed traffic to be routed right next to the palace in those days. So every time a bus or a truck went by, and in Italy lots of buses and trucks, the whole building vibrated, so they could only do the x-rays in the middle of the night when the traffic exits silent. And they managed to get 42 sets of x-rays made, which is pretty clever. And here you can see them looking at some of those x-rays. There's the one they're looking at, actually, I believe. Now, here's the problem. So once we exposed all these x-rays, what were we supposed to do with them? Bring them back to the airport through the x-ray machines? No, I don't think so. We had to process the x-rays on site. So we had to bring an x-ray processor with us. Now, what do you need to process x-rays? 2 things. 1, a room that can be made dark. And 2, a water supply. Sometimes you just have to make do with what you have. And every time they had to process film, they came into the room with the shroud and said, anybody need to go to the bathroom? Like we do with the kids before we take them along the car ride. Anybody need to go? You better go right now. So I'm showing you all this. I know it's humorous. I know it isn't very scientific. I want you to understand what we went through to do what we did. This was not a beautiful laboratory with fancy stuff. We were in a 400-year-old building with great limitations. We also did photomicroscopy, and there's the blood on the shroud. Notice it's still red. And that was what kept me from believing the shroud was authentic for a long, long time. Old blood's supposed to turn red or brown or black pretty quick. Why is it still red? It was 2,000 years old, Vern Miller, and I looked at it and went, something's wrong. Frankly, I didn't get the answer to that till 17 years later. I'm on the phone with Dr. Alan Adler, the other Jewish guy on our team, the blood chemist. And Al called me up and he says, you know, Barry, I'm beginning to believe it's got to be the real thing. It's another Jewish guy. And I said, yeah, but you know, nobody's explained the red blood. And I remember I'm talking to the blood chemist of our team. Boy, did he get upset with me at that moment. Didn't you read my paper 17 years ago? I said, yeah, but you're a chemist and I'm an old hippie photographer, so I might not have understood everything. He said, well, if you had paid attention to my paper, you would have noticed that I detected a high amount of bilirubin. Bilirubin's not a Jewish guy from New York, by the way. But high content of bilirubin. I said, yeah, okay. He said, well, bilirubin's a hemolytic agent, breaks down the red blood cell walls, releasing hemoglobin, and it stays red forever. And that was 1995. That was when I became, that was the last piece that I needed. And then I accepted the shroud was authentic. Somebody once asked me why it took 17 years. And I know why. It's because I wasn't humble enough to do this before then. So I believe that was the beginning of God getting me ready to do what I do now. Because shortly after that conversation, I got a call from a friend who said, you know that shroud thing you're involved with? Well, it turns out it's just a photo by Leonardo da Vinci. And I laughed like you did because I thought he was joking. I said, no, I'm being serious. I said, well, where are you getting your information? Well, my wife and I were checking out at the grocery store on a tabloid. And I had an epiphany at that moment. And I realized how privileged I had been to be on this team, to have access to all the information. And I realized that you don't read scientific journals. So at that moment, while I was still on the phone, I wrote 4 words: consider building a website. And that's the moment God reached down, smacked me upside the head and said, here's the real job. It wasn't about making photos. I'm going to go through this real quick because I'm pretty much out of time. So I'm going to run through these, but what's that? Keep going. Okay. Father says keep going. I'm listening. Thanks, Father. Anyway, ultraviolet fluorescence. The reason that's important is because it reveals things that the unaided eye can't see. And that's one of the most important tests we did. Now, if you look closely, you can clearly see the spear wound itself and the blood flow from it. But if you look around the edge of that, you see kind of a lighter halo around it. Yeah, that's the serum being separated from the solid parts of the blood, only visible with ultraviolet fluorescence photography. So this medieval forger, remember, he invented photography, discovered gravity, made an artwork without any art medium, and then he hid these halos so that maybe someday, 700 years later, somebody'd find a way to see them. And if you believe that, I got a bridge I can sell you up in San Francisco. Or, for that matter, Brooklyn, if you prefer. Anyway, the important thing is this. It revealed things that we didn't see before. And if you look real close, you might detect a little bit. We found this halo around most of the main blood stains on the shroud. Oops. Sorry about that. I was also, there I am again. That's just proof I was really there. Anyway, my hair used to be black. Now it's gone. Well, actually, I still have a lot of hair just sliding off the back of my head. But continuing on, now you've already seen the reflected light photos, my transmitted light photos. One other responsibility I had was to document where each researcher took data from. So we were already using magnets. We got small magnets, coated them with Teflon, gave them to the researchers. Each place that a researcher took data, he would put a marker there. When they were done in that area, I would come in and make these photographs. And then when we came back, I spent several months creating 8 maps of the experiments for each test. And you can see those on shroud.com. I'm not going to go into detail. I can just tell you this. It was done in the old way, in the analog method, in the darkroom. It took 2 months. I could do it in 2 days in Photoshop today. So things have changed. We too had tape, and instead of using our thumb to press it down the way Max did and then peel it off Ray Rogers, realized that he needed to know how much pressure he was applying to the cloth. So he created a torque applicator. There's a scale and a pointer, and when he applied it, and that was steel, when he applied it, he could apply a known amount of pressure. He also realized that if you peel the tape off and you stick it on the glass, what's going to happen? Whatever's been trapped in the gum is going to get pressed deeper into the gum. So he designed and had fabricated these weld slides. You'll note that the tapes are only touching at the edges, and there's a few millimeters of clear space between the gummy side and the glass below it. Again, had to be thought of and prepared and fabricated before we left. And we also had a computer. And that's all it ever did. The entire time it was there, it only did that, and it couldn't, for 5 days and nights, make it do anything else. It was an inside 8080. If there's any computer people in the room, you know what an 8080 chip is, and the rest of you know it, you just didn't realize you knew it. You know those little clocks you stick up on a magnet, and when the battery dies, throw it away and put another one there? That's the chip that's in this computer. So it's not much of a chip, but I always thought that the red and blue switches were really cool looking. I have no idea what they do. The box below that, that's a floppy disk drive, 8-inch floppy disk. Yeah, I think it was 160 kilobytes. So one iPhone photo, about 1,000 disks. Anyway, I felt really bad, but I couldn't make it do anything else. And by the way, this was a kit he had to build the computer to. Yeah, things have changed a little now. So, all right, so we come back from Italy, and we spend the next 3 years reducing our data, evaluating it, our results, writing it into journal papers and articles, submitting it to the finest peer-reviewed journals, remembering what our goal was to answer one question: how is the image formed? We couldn't answer that question. We came back and we could tell you what it's not. We showed that it was not a painting, not a scorch, not a photograph, but we knew of no mechanism that could make an image with these chemical and physical properties. I'm really sorry to make you have to read something here, but I wanted to get it right. This is a summary from our final report. In effect, we couldn't answer that question. So, everybody had enough time? I'll leave it up for a minute or two. But I'm going to ask that the lights come up a little bit now, because I'm finished with the slides for a moment here. Or not for a moment. Oh, boy, good. So, I have to tell you that for years, after I built the website, people asked me a question I didn't know how to answer. And that was, what do you believe? They weren't talking about the shroud anymore. They were talking about faith. I walked away from Judaism the day after my bar mitzvah, because I sensed a certain amount of hypocrisy. It offended me. So I walked away, and God was not a part of my life until I was in my 50s. And it was after I built the website, and people started asking me, that I started considering what I believe, because I wasn't even sure what I believed. And look, I've been to more masses than a lot of my Catholic friends. It's true. How about this? You know the old mission in Santa Barbara? For 3.5 years, I played guitar in the folk mass long before I'd ever heard of the shroud. That was God preparing me to be with you today. Okay, so I'm looking all around, and I can't seem to figure out what it is that I believe, because I was looking outward. And then one day I realized, Barrie, confront your faith. What do you believe? Look in your own heart. And when I remember, I was raised in an Orthodox Jewish home where God was part of everything, every minute of every day. I looked in my heart. There was God waiting for me to just acknowledge Him. He'd been there all along. So how many Jews can say that the Shroud of Turin brought them back to their faith in God? I can. You know? All right. Okay. I have 2 more things to tell you. The first thing is what my little Jewish mother said when she was 87 years old and came and heard me speak on the shroud. Now, of course, she was a little biased. I was going back, this was 15 years ago, going back for my high school 40th reunion. My Catholic friends said, hey, while you're here, give a shroud talk. So they got the Archdiocese, and they gave me a venue, and they put me on the radio, and they put me in the bulletin. And my mother and my brother and my cousins and the whole family came, and we all had a wonderful time, and it was great. And we're driving home, and my mother is absolutely silent. And when a Jewish mother is silent, be afraid. So I couldn't believe it. She was being so silent. I was going, oh boy, remember, born in Poland, immigrated as a child, high school education, not a sophisticated woman. I said, okay, Mother, what do you think? And she turned to me and she said, well, of course, it's authentic. What? What? You're that easily convinced? Took me 17 years after leaving my own DNA on it, and you're convinced after one lecture, albeit from your son, I understand, but still, you're that easy. Why do you believe that? I was shocked. And then she got that tone of voice you moms know how to get when you're talking to one of your kids, you know, that sort of condescending sound in your voice. Barrie, they wouldn't have kept it for 2,000 years. If it had belonged to anyone else, it wouldn't have mattered. And it's humorous. I laughed until I thought about it. The shroud violates a couple Jewish laws. It's got blood on it. It's got an image on it. It's still forbidden by Jewish people and Muslims even to this day. And so her perception of this, think about it. Whoever saved that cloth, remember, it's not mentioned in the Gospels because some iconoclasts would have taken it away immediately. Whoever rescued it put themselves at great risk. And she understood that better than I had ever done until that moment in time. And she recognized that, of course, it had to be authentic because somebody put themselves at great risk to preserve it and rescue it. Unbelievable. So, at the very beginning of my talk, I said, before I'm finished, I'm going to tell you what a nice Jewish boy is doing involved with the most important relic of Christianity. And it took me a long time to come to terms with it, but I finally figured it out. Isn't it funny how God always seems to pick a Jew to be the messenger? I'm just a messenger. Thank you very much.
Program. We're going to move into our panel discussion. So if I can have our panelists reposition themselves on the stage. Tell you what, while we're doing that, why don't I ask everybody real quickly, 30-minute stretch break. Everybody up. 30 seconds.